Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land with ILTV, have no worries. It's time for our new show this week in Israel, where we'll give you the scoop on everything you need to know about the last 7 days right from Tel Aviv. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, here to keep you informed. Breaking developments on the northern Gaza border, the IDF has just launched a military retaliation after mortar shells were fired into Israeli territory from the Strip. The army has confirmed 4 Hamas targets have been hit. Israel believes this attack is payback for the terror tunnel that the army destroyed last month. 14 members of Gaza's Islamic Jihad terror group were killed in the fallout and have been threatening violence ever since. That appears to be exactly what's happening now. 15 mortar rounds were launched from the Strip at IDF soldiers who are stationed along the border. The army has immediately retaliated with both tank and air assaults. We're still waiting to see if things will calm down or if this violence is only the beginning. Well, a Palestinian man has just been shot and killed by an Israeli in the West Bank in an alleged act of self-defense. The Israeli man opened fire on a mob of Palestinians who witnesses say were attacking a group of Israeli children on a hike. The Israeli man, who was working as a security guard at the time, claims he fired in self-defense after one of the Palestinians stole one of their guns. Police, however, dispute this, confirming that no gun was stolen, contrary to his testimony. What is clear for now is that the hikers, mostly Israeli children from the Esh Kodesh outpost, were ultimately cornered by a group of Palestinians throwing rocks. Israeli witnesses at the scene say the guards' actions were indeed a necessary act of self-defense to save the kids. But human rights groups point out that the slain Palestinian man, 48-year-old Mahmoud Zael Odeh, was uninvolved in the matter, working in his nearby farm until he was fatally shot. Israel is sending its deepest sympathies to Egypt, which is still reeling from the deadliest terror attack to have ever been committed on Egyptian soil. This weekend, over 300 innocent people were murdered in cold blood while praying in a mosque in the Sinai Peninsula, and at least 128 others have been injured.
على هذا الحادث الأليم الغادر الخسيس الجبان اللي كان بيهدف إنه يحطم معنوياتنا، بيهدف إلى تدمير صلابتنا، بيهدف إلى التشكيك في قدرتنا. هذا الحادث، هذا العمل الإرهابي الآثم يزيدنا صلابة ويزيدنا قوة ويزيدنا إرادة في إن احنا نقف ونتصدى ونكافح ونحارب الإرهاب.
The Islamic State is believed to be behind this horrific attack, which is shocking not just because of the staggering death toll, but because they targeted an Islamic place of worship. Survivors are recalling with horror how dozens of ISIS fighters surrounded the mosque while prayer was in session, and then launched their ruthless assault using both explosives and gunfire. If ISIS is behind the attack, as many suspect, it would reflect a disturbing new chapter in the terror group's overall strategy that would indeed seem to be the case, given the fact that the Islamic State has been all but wiped out in Syria. Israeli lawmakers across the aisle are condemning the cowardly act of terror as pure evil. And in Tel Aviv, the City Hall building has been illuminated with the Egyptian flag as a show of support for the victims.
בשם כל אזרחי ישראל אנחנו שולחים תנחומים לממשלת מצרים, לאזרחי מצרים, על הרצח ההמוני הנפשע של אזרחים בזמן תפילה. הטרור של האסלאם הקיצוני אינו מבחין בין דתות, בין אנשים, בין עמים, ואני חושב שהדבר המתבקש הוא שכל מדינות העולם יתאחדו להילחם בו בכל מקום, לרבות בסיני.
Although Egypt has launched a counterattack, this deadly and tragic event throws the security situation in the Sinai into a complete crisis. The Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Gaza was actually set to open just yesterday, but now Egyptian officials must keep it closed until things return to normal. Israel's top security officials are convening to assess the new threats mounting on Israel's northern border. The past few weeks have been a tumultuous, bloody time for the region, but rest assured, Israel is doing everything that it can to stay one step ahead of its enemies. Prime Minister Netanyahu's security cabinet is now discussing two massive developments. The first and perhaps most pressing is the growing Iranian presence in Syria. Russia and Syria have already signed a deal to create a buffer zone along Israel's border to keep Iran away. But Netanyahu has reportedly promised Syria that Israel will carry out attacks on any Iranian targets that come within 25 miles of the border. The second concern is the political disarray in Lebanon following the Lebanese prime minister's sudden resignation. And then ever more surprising, reversal. That incident nearly sparked an international proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Lebanon. Hezbollah, of course, is a major player in Lebanese politics, and just yesterday, the head of the UN even warned that a fresh Israeli-Hezbollah conflict might very well be on the horizon. Meanwhile, the dust is still settling in Israel's southern neighbor, Egypt, which just suffered the worst terror attack in the country's history. We're hearing that Israel is now sending military support to help Egypt fight the Islamic State. It's unclear for now exactly how much aid this will be, but sources say it'll likely take the form of Israeli drone strikes. At this time, 305 Egyptians have been confirmed dead in this weekend's tragic attack when terrorists bombed and opened fire on a mosque while prayer was in session. 70 years ago today, the United Nations passed its historic vote on Resolution 181 calling for the creation of the Jewish state of Israel. Leaders from all over the world are gathering to mark the occasion, and U.S. Vice President Pence is swearing that Trump is hard at work to fulfill his promise and move the American embassy to Jerusalem. ILTV's Aaron Porras is here in the studio. Now, Aaron, we've heard this before. Is there anything new about this?
Thank you, Natasha. But unfortunately, no, to answer that question, not entirely. As we've covered in the past, the United States Congress chose to move the United States Embassy to Jerusalem back in 1995. But every president, every administration since then has chosen to sign a 6-month deferral. So every 6 months, the president signs a deferral and pushes it back. What's interesting to note, though, is that this is the first administration I can think of that has continued to make these promises to move the embassy well beyond the campaign trail. So that's cool.
Yes, but does this actually mean that the U.S. is close to following through now, or is it still something that's very far away? Again,
unfortunately, no, not exactly. It doesn't mean anything, really. You know, while Israel does have the opportunity and the right to choose where its capital is, i.e. Jerusalem, and it would be very nice for our allies like the United States to acknowledge that and respect that choice, the Palestinians have also historically chosen Jerusalem, or at least part of the old city, to become part of what is to be their potential future state. So while we might seem like we're getting somewhere because Vice President Pence is saying so, I think it would be wise to maybe hold on to our horses a little bit in terms of the excitement until we see the United States putting its money where its mouth is.
And while for the past 20 years, Congress and successive administrations have expressed a willingness to move our embassy, as we speak, President Donald Trump is actively considering when and how to move the American embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
United States President Donald Trump famously campaigned on his promise to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, something easier said than done. The Palestinians have repeatedly threatened that such a move would put dire consequences on any potential peace with Israel, though. But many see the vice president's words, coming on the 70th anniversary of the United Nations vote to create the Jewish state, as a good sign of things to come. Prime Minister Netanyahu has even thanked Vice President Pence for America's commitment to Israeli concerns.
Thank you, Vice President Pence, for coming to mark this day. Please convey our deepest gratitude to President Trump and to the American people for their steadfast support of Israel. I have no doubt that we'll gather together again in another 70 years to celebrate Israel's continued progress, its prosperity, its power, and the peace that it achieved with its neighbors because of all of you and all of us.
With Prime Minister Netanyahu forging new Israeli alliances in Africa this very moment, clearly there will be a lot to celebrate in another 70 years' time.
Security forces have begun to evict residents from the Netiv Avot outpost, an Israeli settlement in the West Bank that the High Court has ruled was partially built on private Palestinian land. This morning, hundreds of young people were at the outpost in order to prevent the demolition of a woodshop in the Etzion block, even starting fires at the entrances to the neighborhood to slow down the process. Border police officers could be seen dragging the youth out of the woodshop in order to clear the building. The shop is just one of 16 structures that have been slated for demolition by March of 2018. 15 other homes have also been ruled illegal. While none of the homes in the outpost sit entirely on private Palestinian land, 9 of them have significant portions that do. And just last month, the High Court rejected a petition by residents who were seeking to spare the other 6 houses, which barely infringe on private land. Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit is reportedly working to provide building permits to these homes to avert their demolition. But it looks like the razing has already begun. Israel has just raided 3 Palestinian villages in the West Bank that the state believes were illegally built. This is a first step before the army demolishes the villages for good, forcing hundreds of Palestinians to relocate. ILTV's Brett Allen Smith is here. Now, Brett, obviously this is a controversial issue. What are the specifics here?
Well, as usual, there's a lot of red tape here. Like we've seen in the past, these villages have all been slated for demolition because they were built without proper permits or legal approval. The issue, however, is that this is in Area C of the West Bank, which means that even though they're governed by the Palestinian Authority, Israel is actually the one in control of granting the permits for construction in the first place, which is why the Palestinian residents, who will all need to completely relocate and find new homes, argue that it's basically impossible to get legal permission at all.
Now, it's definitely a paradox. I mean, on one hand, just yesterday, Israel evicted a Jewish outpost because it was deemed illegal. So clearly it can go both ways. But I understand that these new Palestinian evictions have ignited quite a lot of controversy.
Absolutely. I mean, 10 Senate Democrats, 4 of whom are Jewish, actually just begged Netanyahu to not go ahead with the demolitions. They're saying that forcing these evictions threatens the chances for the Palestinians to even have their own state, and also endangers Israel's future as a Jewish democracy. Now, in general, Israel is very strict in enforcing these demolitions once they clear the proper legal channels, so it's pretty unlikely that Netanyahu is going to back down now, as you'll see in my report.
At 3 a.m. this morning, Israeli security forces began the process of razing 3 Palestinian villages in the West Bank, questioning residents and collecting ID cards. The state has been preparing for these demolitions for years now, after declaring that they were all built illegally without permission from the Israeli civilian administration. Even in the face of worldwide protest, Netanyahu's government remains committed to upholding evictions for any structures deemed illegal. But for the hundreds of Palestinian and Bedouin residents who must now find new homes, the system feels rigged from the get-go. That's because these villages are located in Area C of the West Bank, a place where the Israeli government rarely approves Palestinian requests for construction. A team of 10 Democratic American senators, including prominent Jewish lawmakers like Bernie Sanders and Dianne Feinstein, have pleaded with Netanyahu to halt the evictions, but from the look of things, it seems that Israel will be moving full steam ahead very shortly.
The Palestinian reconciliation effort seems to have hit a major snag. Hamas had agreed to sign over all control of Gaza to the Palestinian Authority by December 1st, and we're just 4 days away from that deadline now. But according to a top PA official, Hamas still controls over 95% of the Strip. Well, with us to explain is ILTV's Brett Allen Smith. Now, Brett, where are things at right now?
Well, look, no one expected this reconciliation to happen overnight. But obviously this isn't exactly a promising sign, especially considering the fact that Hamas and the PA were just in Egypt for a 2-day marathon of negotiations, which now appear to have staggered to almost a halt. But maybe the most troubling sign here is the PA's civil affairs minister's claim that Hamas is blocking tons of PA operations that are needed to legally transfer power. I mean, fundamental things like collecting taxes, having PA employees physically working out of the offices in Gaza, all the way up to those big picture issues like security aid and leadership.
Well, it's kind of the domino that we're all waiting to see fall, how Hamas and the PA will reconcile the issue of Hamas's army, since Hamas refuses to lay down its weapons.
Sure, I mean, given how slowly things are going now, I'd say that'll definitely be a critical obstacle for real Palestinian unity. I mean, look, by now Hamas had promised to dissolve its governing body in the Strip. The PA says that that hasn't happened. Hamas promised to totally turn over the Strip by the 1st of December. We're 4 days away from that, and the PA says they only have less than 5%. So clearly this is going to be a process, if it really comes true at all, as you'll see now in the report.
A top official in the Palestinian Authority has slammed Hamas for allegedly dragging its heels and handing over Gaza to the PA. Progress in the ongoing Palestinian unity efforts has had its ups and downs over the weeks, but now it's looking like the December 1st deadline to completely relinquish power will not be met. According to Hussein al-Sheikh, the PA's Minister of Civil Affairs, Hamas has actually blocked essential financial, administrative, and security measures required to legally transfer control as promised. Hamas, however, totally denies these claims. A senior Hamas spokesman has tweeted that al-Sheikh's words were in bad faith, even going so far as to call them part of an Israeli conspiracy against Hamas. This echoes similar accusations by Hamas that the United States was attempting to stall Palestinian peace, though many believe these are merely the excuses Hamas makes when it refuses to compromise on peace. With a deadline looming and many critical issues still unresolved, there's a long road ahead for a true Palestinian unity.
A controversial new bill has just cleared a major hurdle and may very well soon become Israeli law. The law would outlaw police from recommending criminal indictments to the Attorney General on any current and future investigations. But here's the issue. It's largely seen as a move by the government to protect Prime Minister Netanyahu from multiple corruption charges of his own.
The Ministerial Committee for Legislation passed the bill after weeks of fierce debate. Proponents defend the move as a reasonable measure to protect the reputation of citizens who are eventually found innocent in court.
החוק כאן בא להגן על כל אזרחי מדינת ישראל בנושא של הפרסום, לא קשור לראש הממשלה.
But given the bill's unusually speedy push through the Knesset at a time when Netanyahu himself is facing multiple criminal investigations of alleged corruption, critics blast it as an obvious attempt to protect Netanyahu from possible fallout of criminal indictments.
ועל מה אתם מגינים ולמה? על ראש ממשלה שמיילל כל היום שהתקשורת לא מגלה לציבור את האמת עליו, אבל הוא רוצה למנוע מהציבור בחוק הזה לדעת את האמת עליו.
A member of Netanyahu's Likud party actually proposed amending the bill to apply to only future cases and exclude Netanyahu's current affairs. The party responded by removing him from the committee and replacing him with one of Netanyahu's closest confidants. Another part of the bill being fiercely debated is that it blocks investigators from revealing the results of their investigations, even if they believe criminal activity did indeed occur. It also jails police who share this information with the public. The bill needs further votes before it becomes a law, but given its momentum so far, many believe that's very likely to happen.
An ultra-Orthodox Knesset member has just stunned the country by suddenly resigning from his cabinet post as Israel's health minister. The reason why? Well, to protest the government policy of allowing train construction during the Holy Shabbat holiday. ILTV's Brett Allen Smith is here with the details. Now, Brett, what exactly happened here?
Well, for about a year now, Israeli railways have been using the Shabbat weekend to do required maintenance on their train lines all over the country. Now, obviously, work like this completely freezes up traffic because the trains can't run, which is why the government greenlit construction to take place over the weekend. Of course, this policy doesn't sit too well with the ultra-Orthodox members of the Knesset, who argue that allowing labor on Shabbat kind of desecrates the Holy Sabbath.
Right, well, it looks like the last straw has finally broken the camel's back, but now that a minister's actually resigned, how will this impact the government?
Well, for the time being, it looks like Netanyahu's coalition will probably be intact. I mean, this minister we're talking about, his name is Yaakov Litzman. He comes from the ultra-Orthodox United Torah Judaism Party, and now that party has 6 seats in the Knesset, which makes them critical to forming Netanyahu's right-wing government. Now, even though Litzman has given up his post, the party says they're committed to staying in the current coalition, and Netanyahu himself has actually stepped in to run the health ministry in Litzman's place. And I've got the rest of the details in my report.
הגשתי מכתב התפטרות לראש הממשלה ולמזכיר הממשלה בעקבות עבודות חילולי שבת ברכבת ישראל אתמול וגם התקופה האחרונה.
Litzman's sudden resignation has been a long time coming, but is a shocking development nonetheless. His ultra-Orthodox United Torah Judaism Party has been contending with the government for nearly a year now, trying to shut down Israel Railways' Shabbat construction. There have been some compromises reached in the past, though. For a time, the state actually used non-Jewish workers to carry out the job in accordance with ultra-Orthodox religious law, an option that's off the table now given specific employees with special skills are required to keep things on track. That's why Israel's welfare minister has decided all work on the railways would be approved for the weekend, saying the country must, quote, ensure the safety of rail traffic, which if not done in time, could endanger lives. But clearly, Litzman has had enough. Railway work went as planned over the weekend, prompting Litzman to resign from his post and condemn what he calls, quote, state-sponsored public desecration of Shabbat. Prime Minister Netanyahu will now oversee the health ministry in his absence.
הממשלה הלאומית בראשות הליכוד היא הממשלה הטובה ביותר למדינת ישראל. אני חושב שכל חברי הקואליציה מעוניינים בהמשך קיומה. אני לא חושב, אני יודע. השבת חשובה לנו, וגם הצרכים של כלל אזרחי ישראל, בתוכם כמובן הצורך של תחבורה בטוחה ורצופה. אני מאמין שאנחנו נמצא פתרון מושכל לזה, אנחנו עובדים על זה, ובהישג יד, ואנחנו נפעל כדי שנוכל יחד להמשיך לשרת את אזרחי ישראל.
Fresh ultra-Orthodox demonstrations have just erupted in Jerusalem, protesting the arrest of 11 Haredi men who refused to report for their army service. Now, police have been called in to break up the massive rally, which blocked the entrance to Jerusalem for a whole 3 hours. This is, of course, just the latest incident in an ongoing series of ultra-Orthodox protests against the military draft law. At least 150 Haredim have flooded the streets of Jerusalem, halting cars, buses, and train traffic in and out of the city. Police were forced to spray protesters with hoses after the crowd refused to disperse, and at least 36 demonstrators have been arrested at this time. This all traces back to a now landmark court decision a few months ago when Israel's High Court revoked the law that exempted the ultra-Orthodox community from mandatory military service in the IDF. Netanyahu's government has pledged to course-correct to status quo with a new law. But in the meantime, Haredim men have been arrested for failing to report for duty, or in many cases for even failing to apply for an extension for an exemption. 11 ultra-Orthodox men were arrested just last week, prompting these new, more extreme protests we're seeing now. Clearly, this is an issue that isn't going anywhere for the time being.
The popular ride-sharing service known as Uber currently runs in an estimated 84 countries around the world. But an Israeli court has just ruled that Israel will officially not be one of them because Uber drivers aren't licensed to drive taxis and don't have the necessary insurances to cover their passengers. Local taxi unions and companies like Get Taxi have been petitioning the courts for a while now to ban Uber from the roads, and it looks like the courts have finally ruled in their favor. Uber is popular in over 600 cities globally, and because anyone with a car and a valid license can become an Uber driver and offer cheaper rides than most city taxis. But here in Israel, taxi drivers actually need to get a special license to provide taxi services, which is why when Uber first arrived, it massively cut into their business. Drivers for Get Taxi, for example, must similarly acquire proper licenses and insurance in order to do business as cabs. While other states have blocked Uber along similar lines, the company evades traditional laws by arguing that payment for Uber drivers is merely a reimbursement for their car maintenance. Uber's regular taxi service, on the other hand, will be allowed to continue in Israel since it's both licensed and insured like cabs, but on a whole, Uber must now desist the majority of its activity in the Holy Land.
All right, Israel is a small country, which means it doesn't have a ton of universities compared to places like the United States and Europe. But get this, 3 Israeli institutions have just been named among the top 100 innovative universities in the world. Obviously, it's quality that matters and not quantity. Reuters compiles their annual list of the world's most innovative universities, and this year was a whopper for Israel. Ranking in at number 82 and up 12 slots from last year is Hebrew University. That's not surprising at all considering the hundreds of amazing startups and patents that come from graduates every year. Reuters even specifically singled out the Yisum Research Development Company, which works with Hebrew University to expose students' cutting-edge research to the marketplace. Tel Aviv University also cracked the top 100, pulling in at number 88. And Israel's Technion University of Technology was ranked at number 89. For 3 Israeli institutions to be on the same list as Stanford, MIT, and Harvard is a huge win for Israeli education. Israel is the only Middle East country that made the list at all, so keep up the good work, students and teachers. That's it for this week's Roundup. Tune in next Friday for our next episode of This Week in Israel. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from Tel Aviv.